Hello friends, we are learning ASP.NET and let us discuss with the web page lifecycle. We are working with the ASP.NET application. To develop the ASP.NET application, the user sits on his browser and types in a URL that a web page will get appear with the text and images that the button and so forth. If he fills in a text box and he will click on a button, what is going on behind the scene? So that is a life cycle. When an ASP page is called, it goes through a particularly life cycle. This is done before the response is sent to the user. There are a series of steps which are followed for the processing of an ASP.NET page. Now, let us look. These are the different stages or phases of the life cycle of an ASP.NET web page. But before that, let us discuss what will be going on behind the scenes. Every request made by the web server, it will initiate a sequence of steps. So these steps from the beginning to end, which will constitute the life cycle of the page. When a page is requested, it is loaded, processed, sent to the user, and unloaded. From one end of the life cycle to the other, the goal of the page is to render appropriate HTML and other output back to the requesting browser. So for this each step, there are some methods and events which are available to let you override the default behavior or add your own programmatic enhancements. So fully understand the life cycle of the page and its controls. It is very necessary to recognize the page class, which will create a hierarchical tree of the controls on the page. This is a hierarchy which has shown in the figure. All the components on the page except for any page directives, which are the part of the control tree. So we can see the control tree for any page by adding trace is equal to true to the page directive. Now the page itself is at the root of the tree. All the named controls are included in the tree, which will be referenced by control ID, static text, including white space, new lines, and HTML tags. Those all are represented in the tree as a literal controls. The order of controls in the tree is strictly hierarchical. Within a given hierarchy level, the controls are ordered in the tree using the same sequence in which they appear in the page file. Now the web components, including the page, it will go through the entire life cycle every time the page is loaded. This will involve a fair amount of performance overhead, which you can reduce by catching of these overheaded page. Now the events will fired first on the page and then recursively on every object in the control tree. The following is a detailed description of each of the phase of the components where the life cycle in the web form. So some of the events in the life cycle which will be having particularly, this is the hierarchical structure which is shown on the ASP.NET web page, and that is shown in the figure. The first, we know that is the page request. After on, the tree structure says that there is a page startup, then the page initialization, then page load, then the validation of that page, then post back event handling, that will be properties will be taken out with the post back, then the page rendering will be done, and at the last the page unload, that is the page will be get unloaded. So every time when we load the page, at the last we have to unload that page. So on the first loading of this page, there are some subsequent postback properties which will show the unloading of that .NET web page. Let us discuss with the all of the stage thoroughly with the ASP.NET page lifecycle. Let us discuss. The next, that is the page lifecycle stages. So in our last slide, we have seen the different stages in the page lifecycle. The first stage was page request. So this is when a page is first requested from the user, but it will be done by the server. When the page is requested, the server checks if it is requested for the first time. If so, then it will need to compile the page, then parse the response and send it across to the user. If it is not the first time the page is requested, the catch is checked to see if the page output exists. If so, that response is sent to the user. So in the first stage, the page will be requested in the first time, or you can say it will be requested on another timing, or you can say multiple times. So if the first time that page will be requested, the page will be get response and sent it to the user. And if it is not at the first time, the page will be requested, the cache, whatever the cache inside the memory will be get checked, and the page output will be existed, that response will be sent to the user. So that was the first stage. The next stage is a page start. During this time, two objects known as a request and response object are created. The request object is used to hold all the information which was sent when the page was requested, and the response object is used to hold the information which is sent back to the user. So at the page start, two objects like request and response object will be get created. The request object is used to hold of all the information which was sent when the page was requested, and the response object is used to hold the information which is sent back to the user. The next stage is a page initialization. Now, during this time, all the controls on the web page is initialized. So, if you have any label, text box, or any other control on the web form, they are all initialized. So, in the page initialization stage, every control on the page will be get initialized with the web form, and those all different controls which are actually present on the page will be get initialized. The next stage is a page load. So this is when the page is actually loaded with the default values. So if a text box is supposed to have some default value, the value is loaded during the page load time. Now, sometimes we require some values will be get preloaded. So those preloaded values will be supposed to get on the web page when it will be get loaded. So at the time of web page loading, those values will be get loaded during the page load time. So that is the next stage. That is the page load. Now, one of the next stage is a validation. Sometimes there can be some validation set on the form. For example, there can be a validation which says that a list box should have certain set of values. If the condition is false, then there should be an error on loading of the page. So validation is concerned with the different maximum or minimum values or some boundaries we can set with every control, or some validation check will be given on the form. So those all validations will be done with this stage. Now there can be some validations where we can say the checkbox, we have to select some check boxes, otherwise the error will be getting on the page. The next and very important stage is the post-back event handling. Now this event is triggered if the some page is being loaded again. This happens in response to the earlier event. Sometimes there can be some situations that a user clicks on a submit button on the page. In this case, the same page is displayed again. In such a case, the postback event handler is called. Now, what will be happen with the postback event handling property, or you can say stage? That event is triggered when the some page is loaded again and again. So this will be happen with the response to the earlier events. If you are pressing the submit button on the page, sometimes the same page is displayed again. So at that time, the postback event handler is called. The next stage is a page rendering. This is also very important. So keep in mind, when page is get loaded on the form, the number of steps, number of stages are happened earlier, and this page rendering will happen just before all the response information is sent to the user. All the information on the form is saved and the result is sent to the user as a complete web page. Now the rendering will be done that the all information with the user has requested to the server. The page rendering gives some response to the user with the all information related to the web page which is requested by the user. This information on the form is particularly saved and the result will be sent to the user as a complete web page. The next page lifecycle stage is the unload. Once the page output is sent to the user, there is no need to keep the ASP.NET Web Forms object in the memory. So the unloading process involves removing all the unwanted objects from the memory. So this is also a very good stage in the web page lifecycle in ASP.NET, where some of the information will be responded to the user from the server, and if the user will get that information, so there will be no any need to keep these all ASP.NET web page form objects in memory. So to avoid this, the particularly you can keep these all ASP.NET web forms will be get cleared with the unloading process. So this will involve removing all the unwanted objects from the memory. So that is the page lifecycle stages. Here, let us discuss with some page events which are actually concerned with the ASP.NET lifecycle. That is the page lifecycle. And the page events are concerned with that ASP.NET page lifecycle. What are those events? The first event is a pre-init. Pre-init event. What is the use of this pre-init event? That is, this event is raised after the start stage, which is complete, and before the initialization stage. The second event is the init stage. Init event. This event will be occurred after all the controls have been initialized, and we can use this event to read or initialize control properties. So these two events, that is pre-init and init, are very close to the initialization stage of the web page. Then init complete is the next page event. This event will occur at the end of the page initialization stage. We can use this event to make the changes to the view state that we want to make sure are persisted after the next postback. So init complete will be the last stage where all these earlier page events are specified, that pre-init and init. So that will be raised at the last when all the changes in the view state will be done, and we have to make sure that all persisted with the next postback property. The next page event is a preload. Preload will be occurred before the postback data is loaded in the controls. So whatever the data will be preloaded, that will be given in this event. The next is a load event. This is important event in the page life cycle of the page events. Let us see the load. That this event is raised for the page first time and then recursively for all the child controls. So this event will be raised for the page in the first time and then recursively for all the child controls which are placed on the page. Then the control events. So this control event is used to handle specific control events such as button controls click event. So there may be some click event or double click event. So we have to use this particularly control event with the button, or you can say text box, or you can say checkbox, you can say radio button, etc. The next page event is a load complete. So this event occurs at the end of the event handling stage. We can use this event for tasks that require all the controls on the page to be loaded. So that will event it will require to all the controls will be loaded, and that will be done at the end of the event handling stage. The next and important page event is a pre-render. The pre-render event, which will occur after the page object has created all controls that are required in order to render the page. So this will be done with the creation of all the controls, and that will be required in order to render all the page. Now this pre-render will be completed with the pre-render complete event. So this event will occur after each data bound control whose data source ID property is set called its data bind method. Now this is mostly used with the database, and this event will occur after each data bound control whose data source ID property is set to call to the data point method. Now the save state complete. This is one of the page event and that will be raised after view state and control state have been saved for the page and for all these controls. So all these controls will be get saved with the every state. Next is a render event. This is not an event. Instead, at the stage of processing, the page object calls this method on each control. So rendering will be done, but this is, we cannot call it as an event, but instead of that, in the each state of processing, the page object will be called this method on each control. So most of the controls we are using on the page, and all these page controls will be get rendered the values. At the last, the page event is unload. So this event raised for each control and then for the page which will get unload the page. So every time when we complete the page with the response and request methods, and at the last we have to unload that particular page. So those are all about the ASP.NET web page life cycle. Thank you very much. Stay healthy, stay home, stay safe. Thank you.